Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the podcast focused on the culture of peace. The culture of peace is an essential part of our evolution and moving forward in a world that is finding the very best for all people in all cultures. And we're delighted to be here with David Adams, who will introduce in a moment. The culture of peace started with the United Nations as a program of action to begin to engage citizens, nations, and all organizations on really engaging the culture of peace in its many different forms. There's everyone that has a participant action to take place as part of a culture of peace. So this is Pathways to Peace. My name is David Wick. I'm the president of Pathways to Peace. I'm delighted to be here and delighted to introduce our wonderful executive director of Pathways to Peace, Tezikiah Gabriel.
Thank you, David. We are so excited about this podcast series. This is number 3 in the series. And as you said, we couldn't have selected a better person to pick up this next piece than David Adams. David is well known as holding and nurturing the spirit, the resources, and really the concepts and and all of the other things we care about with a culture of peace, really holding those through a number of years. So David, we'd love it if you would just begin, and you can begin by telling us a little bit about you. Thank you.
Okay, well, let me go back to the Cuban Missile Crisis, when, like many of us, I became aware that we could destroy the planet. And at that point, I was beginning work on brain research at Yale University. And I had the fortune to meet and to work in the laboratory of a great neurophysiologist who was an expert on the brain mechanisms of aggression. And I thought at that time, if I could understand the brain mechanisms of aggression, maybe I could contribute to peace. And I worked in this field for 25 years, became perhaps the world expert on the brain mechanisms of aggression, and discovered that, in general, I was completely wrong, that the brain mechanisms of aggression have nothing to do with war and peace. In fact, they have to do with anger between individuals. And in the military, you should not be angry. If you're angry at your superior, you get thrown in the brig. And if you're angry at your subordinates, it ruins morale. In fact, General Schwarzkopf, when he was in charge of the war in Iraq, was told by Dick Cheney, who came to Arabia by himself in a plane, to tell Schwarzkopf, one more temper tantrum and you're out, because you're destroying the morale of our forces. On the other hand, anger is absolutely essential for peace activism. All the great peace activists say that I turned to action when I just was fed up with the injustice that we were facing. On the other hand, the mass media, which is in the service of the military-industrial complex, wants you to think that we have brain mechanisms for war, and then it's inevitable, and so that justifies their preparations for war. So we held a meeting. I was part of the International Society for Research on Aggression. We held a meeting of aggression researchers from around the world to answer the question, is violence, the violence of war, is it inevitable because of our biology? We had the leading experts in behavior genetics, in animal behavior, and in brain research, as well as anthropologists, Leakey was involved from Africa, sociologists, etc. And we came to the conclusion, as you know, from the Seville Statement on Violence in 1986, that war is not inevitable. And to quote Margaret Mead, the same species that invented war is capable of inventing peace. War was an invention, and peace must be an invention. Well, I was really lucky because one of the scientists was a biologist, professor from Spain named Federico Mayor, and who signed the Seville Statement. And 1 year later, he was elected the Director General of UNESCO, and he invited me to come to UNESCO to propagate the Seville Statement. While I was there, I proposed the Culture of Peace program. And for 10 years, I was able to do a great deal because I had the support of my friend Federico Mayor. Now, the UN was set up in 1946 on the military model. The only thing is you don't salute when you pass people in the hall. But other than that, everything is hierarchical. If you go over the head of your superior, you are automatically fired. Well, I was fired twice because twice I saw that my superior could not move forward with a culture of peace. And twice, Mayor said, okay, no problem. I'll give you a new position. And each time it was a higher position. As a result, I ended up being in charge of the United Nations International Year for the Culture of Peace for the year 2000. And in that capacity, I was responsible to draft the original draft of the Declaration and Program of Action on a Culture of Peace, which was then sent to the UN and passed thanks to the efforts of Anwar Chowdhury. And that's, you ask of all my accomplishments, which is I'm most proud, and that's the one I'm most proud of. I think it's not exaggerating to say, not an exaggeration to say that it's the most important document by the UN since the Declaration of Human Rights, since it gives a roadmap to the culture of peace. Now, this was opposed at every step by the major powers who don't want peace. First, they said you cannot submit this to the UN because it hasn't passed us at UNESCO. Then when it was at the UN, Chowdhury had to go through something like 18 informal sessions where they made their opposition. Well, in 2000, Mayor left, and I was stranded. The United States came back into UNESCO. They installed a new boss for me, new chief of programming, whose job it was to get rid of me and to close the program. He told me that bluntly. Well, before a couple of weeks before I had to leave, I came in at 5 o'clock in the morning, and with a bank of 10 Xerox machines, I photographed 10,000 pages of documents for what we had done for the culture of peace. Now, that's important because the UN does not keep archives. When I was in charge of the International Year, I went to my friend who was part of the 1986 International Year of Peace, and I said, do you have some archives that I can study to see what were the problems? Oh, no, she said, there are no archives. And UNESCO would not keep anything that we had done. So I had 10,000 pages. But the problem was that in order to get my pension, I had to sign a document that I would never divulge the secret inside information of the UN system. So there are 10,000 pages of documents sitting in the library of Wesleyan University for scholars, and but I have not published, I cannot publish them. In fact, what I'm doing now is creating an index for these 10,000 pages, which is quite a job, but I should finish it by the end of the year. And if Scholar goes to the university, there will be well, they can get from the university an index that gives you the page number for every single person and organization that was involved over the years, and it will be thousands of people, because Well, we mobilized 75 million people for the manifesto, so there were thousands of people involved. So this exists at the University of Wesleyan and in my computer. And so these archives will not be lost. And when I pass away, I will not lose any pension, so I guess somebody can publish them.
Wonderful.
Well, this is fascinating to have the background that you're explaining here. And just to unwrap this a little bit more, when you said that bringing forward the whole focus on the culture of peace and its birth essentially through the UN, but there was so much opposition, the major powers. What's going on there?
Well, when I left UNESCO, I spent the time in the library to write a book which I published. It's on my website, The History of the Culture of War. And really, the culture of war has changed very little since ancient China and Mesopotamia and Egypt. It's still more or less the same qualities and same functions. If you want, in the last century, there's been a refinement of the culture of war so that it is the nation state that has taken the monopoly on the culture of war. No one else can make war except the nation state. And so the nation state has become the culture of war. And for that reason, the UN cannot make peace because it is run by nation states who are the culture of war. Oh, the other conclusion is that the most important arm of the culture of war has become the control of information. And this is important because over time there is more and more democracy, and people more and more in the world can choose what their government does. For that reason, governments must convince their people that preparation for war is necessary. And for that reason, there are agents, government agents in all the mass media to control what can be said and what can't be said. And the only alternative is the alternative media, such as CPNN, which I run.
Right, got it. Yes. Well, then in it was October and November of 1999 was the passage of the resolution for the program of action of the culture of peace. So it became a resolution through the UN as an official document with the 8 action areas, which I'm aware of. And what would you say is the value and the importance of that passage and that documentation moving forward?
Well, it gives us a roadmap. Now, there's something, though, that you should know, which is that the document that we sent to the UN included a section for funding that member states could give voluntary funds for the dissemination of this document. That was stripped by the European Union and the Americans, so that the UN is not allowed to spend 1 cent for the culture of peace.
So again, not wanting, what is the fear behind that people are going to be against the governments or
against the military industrial complex and against the preparations for war? And that's their power. In fact, an argument can be made that since the beginning of history, the major function of the military has not been for external defense, but to maintain internal power. I published an article in the Journal of Peace Research just before going to UNESCO, The History of Military Intervention, Internal Military Intervention in the United States. And it turned out that over the past century and a half, there are something like an average of 18 military interventions per year and something like 12,000 soldiers involved on the average for the last century and a half. At first, it was against slave revolts and the genocide of American Indians. Then it was to suppress strikes and labor movements. And in the 60s, it was to counteract urban riots and so forth.
Yes, it's just also incredibly interesting, David. I love your perspective, and I'm so appreciating that. No one else could speak to your perspective but you, and it's so important. I appreciate it greatly. I wonder if beyond the passage then, which took a lot to get the Declaration and Program of Action passed, and I can hear the challenges with getting it distributed. But as you stand back, how would you describe the evolution of the culture of peace since that time?
Well, we had a decade. Supposedly it was under the charge of UNESCO, but since UNESCO no longer interested in the culture of peace, they did nothing. So Federico Mayor, who was retired, got some money from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Spain to mobilize civil society for the decade, and he asked me to get some young people to work with me to document what the civil society was doing. We were able to document 1,000 different civil society organizations that contributed to the culture of peace during that time from all over the world, and that's still online on one of my websites. We submitted this to the UN, and the UN, it was blocked so that it could not become a UN document. And so again, you see the long arm of the culture of war at the UN system. Then, well, that takes us to 2010.
Yeah.
Since 2010, on CPNN, I document what people are doing around the world for a culture of peace. There's an average of 1 article per day for the past 10 years, which makes what, about 3,000 articles, I guess. Mm-hmm. So it continues, but it doesn't make the news. The news is culture of war.
I was just going to say, so it is, even though within the United Nations, the culture of war persisted, and the culture of peace was not given given what it needed to thrive. When it moved into civil society, it has continued.
That's right.
Yeah. And so
you guys are examples.
Yes. Well, we care deeply.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, in your experience, as you are engaged with many different civil society organizations and people around the world, what is it that lights their flame, that brings in their commitment to the culture of peace? What touches their hearts to move and take action? Because you've been close to that.
Well, it's anger against the injustice of the culture of war, and people are fed up with the culture of war. And look at the millions of people who took to the streets in the last 2 or 3 weeks against the war on Gaza. And this is culture of peace. And
what would be your view or hope in the evolution of the culture of peace? Because my belief is that it's a fundamental of human beings, the desire, the want to live in peace. And that is, I believe, yes, there's difficult things happening and conflicts, but I have a belief that on the long term, overall, we are evolving more to embracing the well-being of the whole, of unity. And what is your view or wish to see, given what you know about the culture of peace? How can we move forward in that way? And what is your vision?
Well, when I was at UNESCO, I was in charge of peace programs in Mozambique and El Salvador coming out of the civil wars in those countries. We were able, with patience, to get the two sides to work together to plan projects for education, culture, science, the different things for which UNESCO is responsible. The only problem was that when those projects came up for funding, the great powers refused to fund them. So the problem is there. If the United Nations continues to be run by nation states, I don't see how we can arrive at a culture of peace. But the present system of nation states is precarious. I agree with Johann Galtung that the American empire is coming to an end and that there will be a grand economic crash. At that point, if we are prepared, we could transform the UN so that it is run by the people. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, is to have a Security Council run by the representatives of the mayors of the world, because the mayors of the world have no interest in nuclear weapons and no interest in armed forces. Mm-hmm. I've tried to get Mayors for Peace to adopt this, and so far I've not been successful, but let's keep trying. Yes. I think you know, David, I talked to you about involving mayors also.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, and bringing it to that point in terms of the evolution, as you well know, David, that coming off of the deep work of Pathways to Peace, focus on the culture of peace and peace building, in general, and the International Day of Peace. But bringing that background to Ashland, Oregon, where I live, with my partner Irene Kai, and inspiring others, we did create the Ashland Culture of Peace Commission, and you were part of our board at one point. And pre-COVID, we had a lot of activity, a lot of action around that focus as a city of peace. And you did write a book about the town hall and the culture of peace in the town hall. What do you see as to the best way to have cities in the town hall embracing the culture of peace? That's where we could really live and thrive.
Well, as I say, I've Mayors for Peace, based in Hiroshima, already has thousands of mayors involved, and I've tried to get them to agree to set up a kind of a mock Security Council, which would show what mayors would do if they were running the Security Council. Mm. And I keep trying to do that, and let's see if eventually we can get through because Mayors for Peace is rather bureaucratic, and so I've not been able to get through that bureaucracy.
I love that.
But if we need to give people the vision that a UN for a culture of peace would be possible if it were run not by the nation state, but by the people.
Yes. And so I'm going to step us back just a little. In your reflections, thinking about the last decades, who have been the real heroes or the real carriers of the flame for a culture of peace, both within the United Nations, but outside of that as well?
Well, I'm hard pressed to pin down individuals. History is so complicated. It's hard. It's hard for me to put my finger on one or two organizations or individuals who are special in that regard. As I say, I've tried to get Mayors for Peace to take the lead, but
right.
That would be useful. I keep trying to do things at UNESCO, but right now, UNESCO has a meeting in Angola, the Luanda Biennale, which I'll put on CPNN, which is which is a good step forward. It's the third edition, I think, and a culture of peace in Africa, because the African Union is involved.
Yes.
I've asked, I'm involved with the support network for the Biennale, and I've asked to try to get young Africans to be reporters to develop a CPN in Africa. We'll see if that can develop.
Nice. Yes.
I also just wondering, you mentioned a number of times the CPNN, and why don't you just, what does that acronym stand for, and tell us a bit about it?
Well, it's called the Culture of Peace News Network. CNN. CNN is actually CWNN. It's the Culture of War News Network, because they have a war room where they have they're prepared for describing all wars in the world. And in fact, I'm pretty sure they have archives in the same way they have archives for obituaries, archives for the backgrounds of all future wars, so that they can immediately tell you the background for the war. Well, that's the Culture of War News Network, and the Culture of Peace News Network is the opposite. We're running in English, Spanish, and French, with an article per day and a bulletin each month, which goes to about 4,000 people.
Amazing.
I started that when I was at UNESCO, but since when Mayor left, it was not possible to continue it there, and I had to take it on my own hands.
And
in the very beginning, we had a CPN in Japan, a CPN in Australia, a CPN in Russia, a CPN in Jordan, but they couldn't be continued in the same way that I continued CPNN.
So, and you don't need to name names at this moment, but do you know of or can think of anyone within the UN or UNESCO or any other role who has some engagement, some affiliation with Culture of Peace that may continue to hold that light?
Well, and for the past, I think, 10 years or so, Anwar Chowdhury has been able to convince the president of the General Assembly to run a Culture of Peace high-level forum. I've been excluded from those for some reason. Never invited to take part. But this year, the president of the General Assembly did not want to work with Chowdhury, and we'll have to see. I think next year the president will be better. I hope so.
Right, got it. Well, just kind of thinking about all that you've been through, and just thank you for your you have made such an incredible contribution to our, I would say, to our humanity's evolution, even with all the challenges. That the idea, the thought lives on the Culture of Peace, and will. And just wondering, what are the things that you have learned? What are the lessons? What are the insights you have learned, given also your background that you're talking about in academia, but through everything you've been through, what stands out?
Well, you know from my emails that I sign off by saying peace through struggle and patience. And so those are the lessons. Peace will not come without struggle. It's a nonviolent fight, and one must be patient.
Well, I think that when you started speaking, and I wrote it down, that that peace must be invented.
Yeah,
that's real important.
Yeah,
and that's something that I'll put on the banner someplace. Yeah. Because it's like, that's in our hands.
That's right. In fact, that was the motto of the International Year was "Peace is in our hands."
Yeah.
Well, actually, there are two mottos. One was "Peace in our hands," which was for English and Russian, and the other was "Cultivate Peace," which was in French and Spanish. And the reason for that was when I worked in Africa, they said, you don't build peace, you cultivate it, because it has its seasons.
Yes.
and you must work with the seasons to develop it.
Huh.
You plant
And-
seed.
And the seasons to you mean what?
Well, the culture of war seems dominant. It's a winter of despair. And then we have the spring of, well, Arab Spring or whatever, to come out of this mess of the culture of war.
Mhm.
And then thinking about the young people, and this is where our hope always is, with young people and with the understanding, with the growth. But education is such a key part of that, and peace education is growing in various ways. What would you want to see that could help engender the embracing of culture of peace with young people, with children?
Well, when I say that peace through struggle, that is implicitly a critique of those that say that peace is to feel good about yourself. And in fact, I think you should not feel good about yourself. You should be angry about what the world is making you do. And that it's this anger of the righteous indignation that for me is the fuel and the motor that can bring forward the culture of peace.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if you, I have on my website, I have a book called The Psychology for Peace Activists. And it's taken from the autobiographies of not Malcolm X, but Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, and others. And in the description, their description, you see that it's the righteous indignation is the fuel that enabled them to move where they did.
And what's the URL of your website?
Well, it's a culture of peace, culture-of-peace.info. And all my books are there.
That's important for all of us.
I think there are about 20 books.
That's important for all of us to know. So.
It is. It is really.
Well, my last blog, which I'm sure you received, was entitled 4 Documents of Inspiration. And that was listing these documents, in fact.
Beautiful.
Oh,
yes.
Really beautiful. So as we're winding down, I wonder, David, is there anything else that you would like people to know, or anything else that you'd like to say before we close our conversation?
Well, let me go back to your founder at Pathways to Peace.
Yes, our dear beloved Avon.
Yeah, and I had the pleasure to meet her on a number of occasions, and
That's Avon Madison. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Avon shows us, I think, if I recall correctly, Avon came from a background which was not at all peace, and she had an epiphany
Right.
As a child.
and to understand that she had to turn away from. Well, I think that's a model for people, that people who are already engaged in the culture of war, they can change and adopt a culture of peace. And I think this capacity of people to change radically, if you want, is so important for the future.
Yes, it is a choice, and we
Yeah.
can
But
do it.
And that's the key. It's as you say, Tezikiah, it's a choice, and we don't realize. I'm generalizing here, but I'd say most of us don't realize how powerful a choice we do have.
Yeah.
Mhm,
We do have a choice.
mhm. David, my goodness,
Well, thank you for
your
including me
body
in
of
your
work.
series.
David, you're so knowledgeable. You're so hardworking. My goodness, your body of work is just incredible, and your wisdom is equally so. So just thank you so very, very much from the bottom of our hearts for your decades-long work for a culture of peace. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, truly, truly. This is important conversation and information for those who will see this in the future, and for a long time to come. And thank you for all that you've done, your inspiration, and you're holding the faith.
Well, I'm
Still,
very proud to be part of your podcast series, and I wish you good fortune with it.
great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.